There's a prison in Russia where time doesn't move forward, it just decays. A place so old, its walls have outlived empires. A place so feared, even hardened killers pray they never see its gates. But the real horror isn't the cold. It isn't the isolation. And it's not even the men locked inside. It's what the prison does to you, slowly, silently, until the man who entered no longer exists. Because in this prison, you don't escape. You disappear. If you're into real dark stories that most people are too afraid to tell, hit subscribe now. Because this one only gets deeper and much, much worse. Long before modern Russia existed, before surveillance cameras, before electricity, there stood a fortress built from stone and suffering. It began as a monastery, a place meant for silence, reflection, and salvation. But over time, something changed. The walls that once held prayers began holding prisoners, political enemies, war criminals, men too dangerous to be kept anywhere else. And slowly, the monastery transformed into something far darker, a place where faith was replaced by fear, where silence was no longer peaceful, but suffocating. The guards had a saying, once you enter, the world forgets you. And for centuries, that's exactly what happened. No records, no visitors, no escape stories, just names that vanished. In the winter of 2003, a prisoner named Sergei Volkov arrived at the gates. He wasn't like the others. Most men came in broken, angry, desperate. Sergei? He walked in calm, quiet, observing everything. That alone made the guards uneasy, because men who don't fear this place usually have nothing left to lose. Sergei had been convicted of multiple murders across 3 regions. Cold, calculated killings. No emotion, no remorse. But what disturbed investigators most was that he never explained why. No motive, no pattern, just silence. And now he was here, inside the one prison designed not just to contain monsters, but to erase them. The gates didn't slam shut behind Sergei. They groaned, like something ancient waking up. Inside, the air felt heavier, colder, the kind of cold that doesn't sit on your skin. It seeps into your bones. The corridors were narrow, the walls thick, the light barely enough to see where you were going. And then came the first rule. No speaking. Not to guards. Not to inmates. Not even to yourself. Silence wasn't just enforced. It was expected. A guard leaned close to Sergei and whispered something no one forgets. You are not here to live. You are here to finish dying. Sergei didn't react. He just nodded as if he already knew. His cell was smaller than a bathroom. Stone walls, iron door, a narrow bed bolted to the ground. No mirror, no window view, just a small slit high above, letting in a thin line of gray light. Day and night didn't exist here. Only time, stretching endlessly. Every movement was controlled. When to eat, when to stand, when to sleep, even when to look up. And the most terrifying rule of all, no human contact. Meals were passed through a slot. Commands were shouted through doors. Weeks could pass without hearing another voice. For most men, that was when they began to break. The guards didn't just enforce rules. They watched, constantly, every blink, every step, every second. And not just for security, but for signs. Because in this prison, men didn't just serve sentences. They deteriorated. Some stopped speaking entirely. Some forgot how to walk properly. Some began talking to people who weren't there. The guards called it the fading. And once it started, there was no coming back. But Sergei? Weeks passed, and nothing changed. He didn't break, didn't panic, didn't show fear. He simply existed, watching, waiting, learning. It happened on day 27. A sound, faint, barely noticeable. A tapping from the wall. At first, Sergei ignored it. This place played tricks on the mind. Sounds came from nowhere. Echoes lingered. But then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. A pattern. Someone was trying to communicate. That was impossible. Cells were isolated. Walls reinforced. No prisoner had ever successfully contacted another. And yet, there it was. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Sergei moved closer to the wall, listened carefully, and for the first time since arriving, he smiled. Communication meant punishment, severe punishment. But Sergei didn't hesitate. He tapped back, softly, carefully, a simple response. Silence followed. Then, tap, 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 faster this time. Desperate, whoever was on the other side had been waiting. For how long? Days? Months? Years? No one knew, because no one had ever tried before. Except now, something had changed, and the prison felt it. Not all guards were the same. Most followed orders without question, but one paid attention. Officer Mikhail Petrov, a man who had worked inside these walls for over a decade. He had seen everything, or at least he thought he had, until Sergei arrived. There was something wrong about him. Not violent, not unstable, just wrong. Too calm, too aware. And when Mikhail reviewed the surveillance logs, he noticed something unusual. Sergei wasn't behaving like a man alone. He would pause, as if listening, react, as if someone had spoken. Mikhail leaned closer to the screen, replayed the footage, again and again, and then he heard it, faint, almost impossible to detect, a tapping sound coming from inside the wall. There was something the prison administration never told outsiders, something buried deeper than the cells themselves. During its early years, the structure had been expanded, modified, rebuilt over centuries. Hidden corridors, sealed chambers, forgotten passageways. Some were documented, most were not, and a few were deliberately erased because they weren't supposed to exist. Mikhail knew the stories. Every guard did, but they were just that, stories. Until now, because if that tapping was real, then someone was inside those walls, and they weren't on any record. The tapping grew more consistent, more precise. It wasn't random anymore. It was structured, like a code. Sergei began memorizing the patterns, repeating them in his head, decoding them piece by piece. Days passed, and slowly, the message became clear. 3 words. Simple. Terrifying. They left me. Sergei froze, because in a prison where no one disappears without explanation, those words meant one thing. Someone had been forgotten, not released, not transferred, forgotten, buried inside the walls, alive. That night, for the first time, Sergei didn't sleep. He sat against the wall, listening, waiting, thinking, because this wasn't just survival anymore. This was something bigger, something hidden, something dangerous. And deep down, Sergei realized something chilling. This prison wasn't designed to keep people in. It was designed to hide something no one was ever supposed to find. And now, he had found it. If you think you figured out what's really inside those walls, comment your theory right now, because what's coming next changes everything. The tapping didn't stop. It became sharper, more urgent, like whoever was behind that wall knew time was running out. Sergei adjusted his rhythm, responding more clearly now. Short taps, pauses, repeating sequences. It was crude but effective, a language built from desperation. And slowly, painfully, the man behind the wall began to speak. Not in full sentences. Not yet, just fragments. Cold, dark, years. Sergei's expression didn't change, but his mind was racing. Years? That was impossible. No one could survive inside a sealed wall for years, unless the wall wasn't sealed. Days turned into a silent exchange of information, tap by tap, word by word. The truth began to take shape. The man had a name, Alexei Morozov, a former inmate, transferred to isolation decades ago, but never recorded as released, never listed as dead, just erased. According to fragments, Alexei had been moved to a temporary holding section. But something went wrong, or someone made a decision. The section was sealed, locked behind stone, and forgotten, except he didn't die. Somehow, he survived. On what? Sergei couldn't understand. But one thing became clear. Alexei wasn't supposed to exist anymore. Officer Mikhail couldn't ignore it anymore. The tapping was real. He knew it. And worse, the system wasn't picking it up properly. It was too faint, too buried within the walls, which meant it was coming from somewhere not officially mapped. That night, after his shift, Mikhail did something no guard was supposed to do. He accessed the old records, not the digital ones, the paper archives, stored deep in the administrative wing, dust-covered files, yellowed pages, handwritten logs from decades ago. He searched for one name, Morozov, and when he found it, his hands froze because the file wasn't complete. Half the pages were missing, torn out, removed deliberately, but one entry remained, a single line, dated 1987. Subject transferred to lower section. Authorization redacted. No signature. No follow-up. Nothing. Just silence. Every prison has rumors. But this one had something else. A place guards whispered about, but never acknowledged openly. The lower section. No official map showed it. No modern blueprint included it. But older staff, they knew, or at least they suspected, a part of the prison buried beneath everything else, older than the current structure, built during a time when records weren't meant to last, a place used for prisoners who couldn't be seen, couldn't be heard, couldn't exist. Mikhail felt a chill run through him, because if Alexei Morozov had been sent there, then the tapping wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from below. Sergei changed his approach. The questions became more direct, more precise. Where are you? The response took longer this time. Slower taps. Weaker. Then finally, under. Sergei's eyes narrowed. Under. That confirmed it. But then came the next message. The one that changed everything. Not alone. Sergei leaned back. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not fear. Not panic. Something else. Interest. Because if Alexei wasn't alone, then whatever was beneath the prison was bigger than just one forgotten man. The next sequence came fast, chaotic, unlike anything before. Tap, 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 irregular. Panicked, Sergei pressed his ear against the wall, focused, decoding as quickly as he could. And then he understood. They hear you. Sergei froze. Silence filled the cell. Heavy, oppressive. Then, for the first time since the tapping began, there was another sound, not from the wall, not from Sergei, but from somewhere deeper. A low, dragging noise, like something moving. Mikhail couldn't sleep. The file, the tapping, the missing records. It all pointed to one thing, something buried beneath the prison. So he made a decision, a dangerous one. After hours, he accessed a restricted maintenance corridor, one rarely used, one that led downward. The air grew colder with each step. The lights flickered. The walls changed. New stone gave way to older construction, rougher, cruder, ancient. And then he saw it, a door, half hidden behind a rusted metal barrier. No label, no lock code, just an old mechanical seal, untouched for years. Mikhail hesitated, because every instinct told him to turn back, but instead, he reached for the handle. Back in his cell, Sergei sat perfectly still, listening. The tapping had stopped, completely, but the other sound, it hadn't. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. Footsteps, slow, heavy, not coming from the corridor outside, but from beneath the floor. Sergei's gaze shifted downward, focused, calculating, because whatever was below was moving, and it was getting closer. Mikhail pulled the handle. At first, nothing happened. Then, a sharp crack echoed through the corridor. Dust fell from the ceiling. The seal broke. The door shifted, just enough to open. A rush of air escaped from inside. Cold, stale, wrong. Mikhail stepped back instinctively, covering his nose. The smell hit him instantly. Decay, but not fresh. Old, layered, like something had been rotting for a very long time. He shined his flashlight into the darkness, and what he saw made his blood run cold. It wasn't a corridor. It wasn't even a proper room. It was a series of narrow compartments, stacked, hidden, like cages built into the walls themselves. And inside them, remains, bones, clothing, fragments of human existence, left behind. Mikhail staggered back, trying to process what he was seeing. This wasn't a forgotten section. This was a burial ground, a place where prisoners had been disposed of, quietly, permanently, without records, without names. But then he heard it, a sound from deeper inside, a faint scratching. Not bones, not debris, something alive. Mikhail moved forward slowly, step by step, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The scratching grew louder, more desperate, and then he saw movement. At the far end of the chamber, behind a partially collapsed wall, something shifted. Mikhail raised the light, and for a split second, he locked eyes with it. A face, pale, sunken, barely human, but alive, very much alive. Mikhail stumbled back in shock, because the man staring at him shouldn't exist. And yet, he did. At that exact moment, Sergei felt it. The tapping returned, violent this time, urgent beyond anything before. He leaned in, decoding faster than ever. And then, the message came through, clear, terrifying, too late. Sergei's eyes lifted slowly, toward the door of his cell, because now he understood something critical. This wasn't just about survival. It wasn't just about a forgotten prisoner. Something had been sealed beneath this prison for decades, not to keep people inside, but to keep something else from getting out. And just like that, the prison that was built to bury the worst men in history revealed something far worse than the criminals it held. Not an escape story, not a redemption story, but a story about what happens when people are erased so completely that even time forgets them. Sergei thought he was entering a place designed to break him, but instead, he uncovered something no one was ever supposed to find. A hidden past, a buried truth, and a presence that may have never left those walls. Because in the end, the most terrifying part of this prison isn't the isolation or the silence. It's the question no one can answer. How many others are still down there, waiting, unheard, forgotten? And if the walls could speak, would anyone survive hearing the truth? If this story pulled you in, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story dives even deeper into the darkest places on Earth, where the line between punishment and something far more disturbing completely disappears. And trust me, you haven't seen anything yet.